I need your deck. This is a bad one, the worst yet.
In 1982, audiences saw a version of Blade Runner that Ridley Scott had never approved. They heard a narration that Harrison Ford reportedly delivered as badly as he possibly could, in the deliberate hope that the producers would hear it and abandon the idea entirely. They watched a final scene constructed from aerial footage that Stanley Kubrick had shot for a completely different film 2 years earlier and had then decided not to use. And then, for 10 years, that was the only Blade Runner that existed, the studio's version, playing in every cinema and on every television broadcast over the objections of the man who made it. Then, in 1990, a projectionist at a Los Angeles cinema loaded the wrong print. The audience noticed immediately that something was different. Critics wrote about it. And the existence of another Blade Runner, the version Scott had always intended, became impossible to deny. Number 1. The film Scott delivered. Ridley Scott came to Blade Runner in the spring of 1980, approximately 18 months after the release of Alien. He was handed Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, a book about a bounty hunter in a collapsed future Los Angeles who tracks down rogue synthetic humans called replicants, and a screenplay that had gone through multiple drafts, the most recent rewrite by a writer named David Peoples. The production was set up by a company called The Ladd Company, with Warner Brothers handling distribution, and the budget was substantial for the period. Scott had considerable creative authority coming off Alien's success, and he intended to use it. The film's central question, as Scott understood it, was never the plot. The plot, find the replicants, retire them, collect the fee, was simply the chassis. The question underneath it was more fundamental. How do you know what is real? How do you know whether the things you remember actually happened to you? How do you know, for that matter, whether you are who you believe yourself to be? Scott wanted to make a film that refused to answer any of those questions directly, that placed the audience in exactly the same position of uncertainty as its characters. The studio, as studios tend to do, wanted the opposite. Number 2. The shoot in Scott's original cut. Principal photography on Blade Runner began in March of 1981 on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, California, and continued for approximately 5 months. The shoot was, by most accounts on the record, deeply and persistently unhappy. The British crew and the American crew worked to different rhythms and different assumptions about how a set should function. Scott's methods precise, demanding, iterative generated friction from early in the production. The crew reportedly referred to him, at various points, as the Ayatollah. Harrison Ford, playing the bounty hunter Rick Deckard, was publicly and consistently dissatisfied throughout the shoot, and he and Scott disagreed about the character in ways that went beyond on-set tension. Ford believed Deckard was a human being doing a brutal and demoralizing job in a world that had stopped rewarding people who did it. Scott believed Deckard was something else entirely, though he would not say so publicly for some years to come. Despite all of that friction, the production delivered something extraordinary. Sid Mead's designs created a Los Angeles of permanent rain and neon, Chinese signage layered over Roman columns, police spinners drifting through a sky dense with competing light sources. Douglas Trumbull's visual effects were among the most sophisticated that had been produced at that point in cinema history. The world of the film was internally consistent and coherent in a way that science fiction had rarely achieved before. Scott's cut of the film ran without a narrator, concluded on an elevator door closing, and contained, approximately 40 minutes into the running time, a 58-second dream sequence involving a white unicorn running through a forest. Number 3. The test screening problem. The Ladd Company held test screenings of the film in Denver and Dallas in the spring of 1982. The audience response scores came back low. Viewers reported that they were confused, they could not follow the story, could not track who among the characters was human and who was not, could not orientate themselves in the world the film was constructing. The studio's interpretation of this was that the film had a clarity problem. If the audience was confused, the solution was a narrator who would unconfuse them. If the film's images were withholding information, a voice would supply it. Harrison Ford, speaking in first person over those images, would explain to viewers exactly what they were looking at and exactly what it meant at every turn. The film that Ridley Scott had designed to disorient would now tell audiences how to feel at every point in the story. The recording sessions were arranged, and Scott found himself in the position that many directors before and after him have occupied, watching a film he had made be reassembled into something he had not. Number 4. The voiceover Ford reportedly delivered badly. What happened in those voiceover recording sessions has been disputed in various forms across 4 decades of interviews and has never been definitively settled. What is agreed? Harrison Ford recorded the narration. What is disputed and has remained disputed differently by Ford himself at different points in time is the spirit in which he did so. Ford has been widely quoted across multiple interviews saying that he delivered the lines as flatly and lifelessly as he could in the deliberate hope that the producers would hear the result and decide the narration was unworkable and should be abandoned. In other interviews, across the same 40-year span, he has softened or walked back that account, suggesting that the story of deliberate sabotage had become a better anecdote than it was an accurate description of what actually happened. Ridley Scott has said consistently and across many separate interviews and commentaries that the voiceover was imposed on him, that it was not his creative decision and not something he would ever have included. What the result sounded like is available for comparison in any copy of the theatrical cut. They don't advertise for killers in the newspaper. That was my profession. Ex-cop, ex-Blade Runner. Ex-killer. A narration that told audiences what the film's images were already communicating, in a tone that both Scott and many critics at the time described as fundamentally inconsistent with the material. The studio heard it and kept it. Number 5. The ending borrowed from Kubrick. The second intervention concerned the ending. Scott's cut concluded with Deckard and Rachel, the replicant he has fallen for, stepping into an elevator together. The door closed, the film cut to black. It was deliberately and exactly not a resolution, more of a suspended moment, a breath held indefinitely. The audience was left in the same condition of uncertainty as the characters. The studio wanted something warmer, something that told the audience the story had ended well. They wanted to know the couple had escaped, that there was a world beyond the city, that something had survived the film intact. And so a third element was introduced, one that has become, in the years since, a minor legend in film editing history. Warner Brothers had in their archive aerial footage that Stanley Kubrick had shot during the production of The Shining, his 1980 adaptation of Stephen King's novel, and had decided not to use Green Mountains. Open Sky. The Pacific Northwest. Filmed from above in full daylight, everything that the permanent night of Los Angeles in Blade Runner was not. This footage was retrieved from the Warner Brothers vault, cut together into a sequence of Deckard and Rachel driving out of the city and into that open landscape and placed at the end of Blade Runner as a coda. The screen went to black, the film ended. Scott has described this ending in several interviews over the following decades as ridiculous. It was Kubrick's footage from a different film with a different emotional register. It was not his ending. And it directly contradicted a line of dialogue that was already in the film. Number 6. The Unicorn Dream. The third and most consequential cut was the quietest. 58 seconds of footage, shot during principal photography in 1981, that had been present in the original work print of the film and was removed before theatrical release. A dream sequence. Deckard, asleep at his piano, sees a white unicorn moving slowly through a sunlit forest. The image has no obvious narrative function in the conventional sense. It does not advance the plot, does not explain anything about the story, does not connect directly to any scene immediately before or after it. It simply exists for just under a minute in the middle of a film about whether the things you remember are real. At the end of the film, Gaff, the police officer who has been assigned to monitor Deckard throughout the story, leaves behind a small origami figure on the corridor floor outside Deckard's apartment. A unicorn. Taken together, with the dream sequence in place, the implication is precise and devastating. Gaff knew about the unicorn. Deckard never told anyone about the unicorn. The only mechanism by which Gaff could know what Deckard dreamed is if the dream was not a genuine dream at all, if it was an implanted memory, a piece of programmed inner life inserted into a manufactured person. If Deckard is a replicant, Gaff's origami unicorn is the evidence of it. If Deckard is human, it is a coincidence. The theatrical cut removed the dream. Without it, the unicorn at the end of the film is a small and slightly cryptic detail, a gesture that might mean something or might not. With it, the film becomes a fundamentally different question. Number 7. The work print that escaped. In 1990, a cinema in Los Angeles called The New Art was booked to screen Blade Runner as part of a repertory program. The print that arrived at The New Art was not the theatrical version. It was a work print, an earlier assembly of the film with different opening titles, no voiceover narration anywhere in the running time, none of the Kubrick nature footage at the end, and the unicorn dream sequence fully restored in the middle. The New Art screened it. Audiences who attended those screenings recognized with varying degrees of precision that something was different about the film they were watching. It was tighter. It was stranger. It withheld more, and what it withheld felt deliberate rather than confusing. Word spread quickly among film audiences in Los Angeles, and film critics attended subsequent screenings and wrote about what they had seen. The screenings became a modest but significant cultural event, and from them emerged the fact that Warner Brothers and the producers could no longer comfortably dismiss. A meaningful portion of the film's audience preferred a version of Blade Runner that the studio had never officially released. Ridley Scott, who had spent the intervening 8 years making other films and had largely stepped away from any conversation about Blade Runner, was approached about returning to the project. 2 years later, he agreed. Number 8. The directors in 1992. The 1992 director's cut of Blade Runner was, by Scott's own later description, not the version he had fully intended. He was given limited time and a restricted budget to work on it, a constrained restoration rather than a complete reimagining. The voiceover narration came out. The Kubrick nature footage came out. The unicorn dream went back in. But there were elements that Scott had wanted to address, color grading choices that had been made under time pressure in the original post-production, visual effects shots he had never been satisfied with, sound mix compromises that had accumulated during the original troubled edit that the resources available to him in 1992 did not allow him to correct. The director's cut was a substantially better film, by Scott's own measure, than the theatrical release. It restored the 3 structural elements he had most objected to losing. But it was not, in his view, the definitive version. For that, he would have to wait another 15 years and find a different route back into the film. Number 9. The Final Cut. In 2007, 25 years after the original theatrical release, Scott completed and released what he has called the Final Cut of Blade Runner. It is the only version of the film over which he has held complete creative control from the beginning of the work to the end, the only one he describes, without qualification, as entirely his. The work undertaken for the Final Cut was thorough and comprehensive. The color grading was fully revised throughout. Several visual effects shots were corrected or replaced, including a shot in which the face of a stunt double was visible in a sequence that required Deckard to be performing the action. A handful of continuity problems were addressed. A sound mix that had been compromised in various ways across the earlier versions was reworked with the resources and technology available in 2007, and the fundamental architecture of the film, no voiceover narration, no Kubrick nature footage, the unicorn dream in place, the elevator door closing on an unresolved question remained exactly as it had been in Scott's original cut from 1982. Gaff's origami unicorn still sits on the corridor floor. The question of what Deckard is remains unanswered. That is the version Ridley Scott considers his film. Number 10. The Deckard question. The question the Unicorn Dream raises, is Deckard a replicant, has divided the film's audience and its two principal creative voices for more than 40 years, and it shows no sign of being resolved, partly because it appears that neither side has any interest in resolving it. Ridley Scott says yes. He has said so in interviews, in audio commentary on the director's cut, in the press materials for the final cut, and in various other contexts over the decades. Deckard was always intended to be a replicant. The Unicorn Dream is the evidence of it. Gaff's unicorn is the confirmation. The ending of the film is not an escape, it is a temporary reprieve, extended by one manufactured person to another, the terms and duration of which are entirely unspecified. Harrison Ford says no. He has maintained with equal consistency that he played Deckard throughout the production as a human being, a man doing a terrible and morally compromised job in a world that had stopped offering people like him anything better. Ford's argument is partly structural. If Deckard is a replicant, the emotional stakes of the film collapse into a category error. A machine hunting machines is a logistics problem. A man who falls in love with the thing he was sent to kill and then refuses to finish the job is a tragedy. Philip K. Dick's source novel does not resolve the question either, though it tilts slightly in the direction of Deckard being human. The final cut does not resolve it. All of this is almost certainly the point. The film Scott spent 25 years trying to recover is a film built around a question it refuses to answer, and the theatrical version, with its explanatory narration and its landscape ending and its removal of the dream, was a version that had tried to answer it anyway, without being asked. Number 11. Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick, the author of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, died on the 2nd of March, 1982, 3 months before the theatrical release of Blade Runner and 25 years before the final cut. In the months before his death, he had been shown approximately 30 minutes of completed footage from the production Sid Mead's sets, Douglas Trumbull's visual effects work, the Los Angeles that had been constructed from the world his novel had described. His response, documented in letters and in conversations from that period, was substantially positive. He wrote that the production had realized a future world that he had spent years trying to put into words. He was, by multiple accounts, genuinely moved by what he saw. He did not live to hear the narration Ford reportedly delivered badly. He did not see the ending constructed from footage Kubrick had discarded. He did not hear the lines that explained to audiences what his images had been designed to withhold. Whether the film that opened in June of 1982 bore any close relationship to what he had imagined when he wrote the novel in 1967 is not a question that can now be answered. What can be said is that the version Ridley Scott spent 25 years recovering without the imposed narration, without Kubrick's landscape, with the Unicorn Dream in place and the question unresolved was, at minimum, a version that had started from the same instinct as the novel. That the most important questions are the ones a story refuses to answer. Blade Runner now exists in at least 5 distinct versions across more than 40 years. The one that most people encountered first with the narration, Ford reportedly delivered flat on purpose, the ending assembled from Kubrick's unused footage. The Unicorn Dream missing from the middle was never the film its director made. What the final cut tells us is that the missing frame was always there. It just took 25 years to put it back.